Well, we're light on numbers today, but we have people all the way from Montana to the Caribbean. So everybody's out and about, and some are sick and doing different things. Let's remember those who are not here today. Well, we're starting with Revelation 12, and the title is A Revelation Flashback because that's what chapter 12 is. You know, the really good stuff in Revelation for me is in chapters 12, 13, 14, right in this section here. This is the stuff that doesn't seem to compare to anything in the Old Testament. In other words, this is not really a symbolic language as much as it is a grand vision with a lot of metaphors and exciting special effects and all that sort of thing. Revelation 12 is a great chapter. And we're still in between the sixth and the seventh trumpet. And we're waiting for that seventh trumpet to blow. What happens when the seventh trumpet blows? You know, is that at the end of it all? We're being held in suspense. That's one of the things about John's writing is if it may not compare to, for us, it may not compare because we are so used to these Hollywood epics with all kinds of special effects and exciting adventure movies that hold you in suspense all the way through, or series on Netflix where at the end of each episode they have a teaser, they have something that happens to say, I got to see the next episode and the next episode and the next episode. And we're used to that sort of thing. But that's what Revelation is like for the people that are hearing it for the first time. It's a multimedia but anyway, it's an extravaganza. That's what the word I was looking at. Multimedia extravaganza. And they're getting quite a show, I guess you would say. I hope that's not irreverent about the book of Revelation, but it really is an exciting thing that John is presenting to them, and they're reading it in worship. Revelation 12, 1 through 17. Let's read. A great sign appeared in heaven. Now that's a good opening, a good beginning. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. That's quite a sign appearing in the heavens. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. Now that is symbolic. We're going to learn chapter 17, the 7 heads are the 7 hills. This is Rome. Rome sat on 7 hills, and it still does. You know, there's 7 hills that surround it, and 10 horns is either emperors or other political figures. There's been many attempts across history to try to identify who these political figures all were, or which emperors they were, so we could date the time of Revelation's writing. And none of those attempts have ever succeeded in providing much or producing much. They all are in disagreement with one another about the exact identification, and so there's nothing there other than it may represent emperors of Rome. But this whole thing is aimed at Rome, and we're going to talk about that. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky. Its tail. I mean, this is some gigantic serpent. In the ancient world, serpents were often part of the law. In the Old Testament, they're called Leviathan. And in some of the Psalms and some other texts of the Old Testament, they'll talk about the Leviathan. But in the Psalms in particular, about how God has dealt with the Leviathan in the deep sea, or the sky dragons. This is the dragon. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Here she is in labor, desperately trying to give birth to this child, and here's this monster in front of her ready to devour the child as soon as it's born. Do you get the picture? The woman, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. That number comes from the book of Daniel and is used frequently in Revelation, and 1,260 days equals 3.5 years, and 3.5 years equals half of 7 years, and anything that is ultimate or everlasting is 7, and everything that is temporary or mortal or incomplete is 3.5. That's what those numbers mean. So for just a short time, she has to be taken care of. And the wilderness is not a place of suffering and temptation as it has appeared in other places. For instance, Jesus' temptation was in the wilderness. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. There was two different understandings of the wilderness experience. One, that it was a time of great testing and sacrifice. The other, that it was a time where God was closest to his people. One, it was a time of grumbling and disobedience. The other is it was a time when people felt closer to God than when they settled in the land and started to find security, protection, and future in their own efforts. Then war broke out in heaven. Now this is a spiritual reality. He's leading us up to the heavens, just as he was invited up to the throne room in the 4th chapter of the book of Revelation. Now he's looking at things from the perspective of heaven again. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb. That's a very important phrase. Look at that. They triumphed over the devil. This is all kind of a cosmic look at backwards, the whole planet, but also forwards. It really is a overview, looking down on the whole panorama of salvation events, and they're presented that way. They triumphed over him, over the devil, by the blood of the Lamb, a reminder to the church that how the church is going to fare and how it's going to accomplish its mission, how it will triumph over all evil, is through the blood of the Lamb. Another one of those reminders that that's how Jesus triumphed over the devil and over death, was through the blood of the Lamb. Now, here we're not talking about the locust horde and the angelic armies numbering millions upon millions coming, and bloodshed and violence and battlefields and all that sort of thing. Here we're talking about the blood of the Lamb, which has been at the center of the church's life always. And John constantly reminds them that the way that they will triumph in the world is through the blood of the Lamb. In spite of the danger that they are in, he still sees that the most effective weapon they have is the blood of the Lamb of Jesus. It's an important phrase. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. So the church's sacrifices, martyrios, its witness. That's what martyrios is, the word for witness, which has become in general usage in the church, martyr, martyrios. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their life so much as to shrink from death. Wow, they even accepted death as part of their sacrifice on behalf of the Lamb. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. My music era was the 60s, and so I can put on a 60s station on Sirius and listen to all the old 60s, and I get nostalgic. The music takes me back to my youth and my times in college. Good days. And I will recall friends of those days and things that I experienced in those days and become very nostalgic for them. Now, my whole youth and childhood, of course, was not idealistic or the golden age. I would not call it that. But there were some really, really good times. And as I grow older, I especially look with some envy upon youth. I look back at those days with nostalgia, call those the good times. I'm wondering about, so I was listening to music on a 60s station this week and got nostalgic, and I started wondering about the people of John's churches. Were they ever nostalgic for a time when things were not so dangerous? Did they ever look back and say, hey, then we lived in relative security and some ease and all? Did they ever do that? How did it compare with their days after they came to know Jesus and accept him as their Lord and Savior? I mean, there was a time when they got invited to the neighborhood picnics. There was a time when their kids didn't get hassled at school, and they went to school events and people didn't snub them. They talked to them. There was a time that they were included. And that was not only in the culture and the public arena, but they were included at home with their families. There was a time they could sit down to family dinners and somebody not get mad and get up and walk out because of the political discussions. There was a time when they could get together and they were welcome whichever family home that they were meeting in with other members of their family. There was a time when they didn't have to worry about their jobs or how they were going to survive economically. There was a time when they were certain that they could put roofs over their heads and foods on their tables. There was a time when they didn't have to be startled by every knock at the door and worried about who was on the other side and what was coming next. There was a time when they didn't have to think about what would happen to their children if they got arrested or if they were hauled in and by Roman authorities. There was a time that they didn't have to worry about their Jewish neighbors and friends or their own family, which many of them were Jewish, turning them into the authorities or resentfully coming after them in another way. There was just another time when life had to be easier than it was in this time in the book of Revelation. And how did they feel about that? Did their lives after they came to know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior get easier? No. It did not. And how did they feel about that? Well, we know many were holding steadfast to Christ. They were not giving up. They were not giving in and turning back, saying, it was easier. It was easier back when, and we felt safer back when, and they're not doing that. Why not? What keeps them moving forward in this new life? There were some who were, and that's what John's concern is. But what is it that is keeping them, moving them forward, even at the risk or in the face of the danger of persecution? The emperor has declared himself Lord and Savior, and they know that they will not be welcome at the local temple unless they're ready to go in there and confess Dominus as Lord and Savior and burn a pinch of incense to him. And they can't get together for a barbecue on Saturday night with their neighbors and friends and talk about religion, to be sure. It's too dangerous. But they're not turning back. John's church knows who's persecuting them. They don't have to be told. They know that the official persecution is coming from Rome, but it has infiltrated or come out to the provinces of the Roman Empire in the form of Roman officials who are now willing to persecute the church. This is a change because as early as 64 AD, around that time, no, a little earlier than that, Claudius, that was before Nero, and he was in 60 to 64. Claudius expelled Christians and Jews from Rome because of a conflict between certain sects within Judaism. That's how he saw them. They were all part of Judaism. And this conflict was over Christus, he wrote. And he would have none of it within the streets of Rome. So he expels Jewish and Christian people from the city of Rome, prohibits them from being there. In that point, he still understood, the Roman Empire therefore still understood that Christianity was just a part of Judaism. And they didn't have much worry about it or concern for it, and they certainly didn't persecute it. Nero started some persecution of Christians, but in the limited precincts of Rome, over the fire that burned down Rome. He blamed it on the Christians. But by the time we get to 90 AD, the possibilities of persecution and the actual reality of persecution is already taking place on a limited scale, and the possibilities of an empire-wide persecution of Christians is there. It's right before them. For the first time, they're no longer seen as a sect of Judaism and therefore exempt from Roman authorities' demands about loyalty rights within the temple. They were different. They weren't part of Judaism. They didn't have that blanket exemption. They didn't have that covering them. They knew exactly who was persecuting them. But what John does in chapter 12 is to take this knowledge of what is an empire event, something going throughout all the provinces of Asia and Africa and Italy and such, all the way up into Gaul. This is just an empire event, and John turns it into a cosmic event. He doesn't say, now this is just a small thing, it's only going to be for a short time. He does have some indications that it is temporary, 1,260 days. But at the same time, he does not bring down the danger, he increases the sense of danger. This is a cosmic event. And that's the meaning of the woman who appears in the first verses of chapter 12. Clothed with the moon, the sun, the stars. She is also the Messianic mother, that who gives birth to the Messiah. And the Messiah in chapter 12 of the book of Revelation, the whole Messiah is viewed as the Messianic event. It begins with Israel that was called into covenant with God, and its mission was the same as that of the church, which was to be a light to the nations. Throughout the New Testament, that kind of imagery is used in various ways. Israel was to be a light to the nations. You look into the Psalms and Isaiah and all the prophets, it's their failure to honor God and to stay faithful that has limited their ability to be the light unto the nations. And that was Israel's calling. It's the church's calling. We're to be the light unto the nations. It's therefore the case that the Messiah comes from the whole of God's people. So this Messianic mother represents both Israel and the church in that respect. And she's ready to give birth to the Messianic events. That is, the Messiah is at the center of a Messianic event that stretches all the way back to the moments of creation when time began and will stretch all the way forward until the eternal kingdoms come. This is the Messianic mother in this garb. And so what you'll see here is incarnation, a baby being born, Christmas. You'll see cross, resurrection references, Easter. You'll see the whole of the history of God's salvation events really in capsulized form, and it gets confusing because of that. What are we looking at exactly here? Are we looking at John just kind of giving us the Christmas, his own Christmas narrative like Matthew and Luke? No, it's all of it. It's the whole messianic event. But it's not just Jesus' incarnation, ministry, death, and resurrection. It is Israel's parts in all of that as well. So it's the cosmic messianic events. In fact, all of history is before us and before his readers. And here's another note about that. It is all being enacted again in a spiritual realm. Did this whole thing have to be enlarged for the churches for them to grasp what danger they were in? No, not at all. They knew the danger that they were in. But when he enlarges it on the cosmic scale, what he is saying to them is that the plan of salvation is an eternal plan before time began, since the beginning of time until the end of all time, when it reaches its final culmination in ultimate victory. It's all a part of God's plan. And God has this plan, and he's in charge of this plan, and he's going to make sure that everything happens according to plan when it needs to happen. And he is the one who is omnipotent and powerful enough to make all of this happen. He has cosmic size, and it's all planned out, and it's all enacted out first in the heavenly places. And then he has that fall of the fallen angel Lucifer, or the devil, from heaven, which actually is the best writing about this, narrative of that, is actually from Milton's Paradise Lost, not from Isaiah and Revelation. But here we have the basis for Milton's Paradise Lost. The fallen angel from heaven, Lucifer, and the devil. And so now God has size. Do you get it? God has size into their current troubles and their current situation. And John is saying to them, nothing is happening according to by chance. It isn't just, there are various views of history, and one is linear. We know those views. That's everything is, history is a straight line, one event following another. Then there's the view of history that is more that of Native Americans, where history is circular. It isn't a straight line of events with a beginning and a definite end, but it is a circle which is eternal and ongoing. Life is a circle, Disney's song from The Lion King. You all know that one. It's not Christian, by the way. Life is a circle. That's not Western Christianity, at least. It is Eastern Christianity, but it's not Western. Life is a circle without beginning or end. Now, in our view of history, it is linear. It has a beginning, Genesis, it has an end, Revelation, right? It's just one long line of event after event after events. And sometimes, though, in thinking about this way of history, we tend to slip into a kind of cosmic complacency. Events happen. They just one after another. And they just happen to happen. That is, they're not planned, they're random. They're random series of events. Okay, I watch my grandchildren playing with Legos. And they may start out with, unless we get them one of those box sets where they have instructions, and they open those up, and there's a little book inside that tells them where to start and how to proceed, and it's very linear. It starts with the very first Lego to the very last Lego, and it's just adding one Lego on top of another in the right order or sequence until you get built whatever the box promises is in there. But if you just give them a whole bucket full of Legos and say go to town, what they do is just start taking Legos out and kind of laying them out and putting one on top of another without any real definite plan. And it's more a random happenstance. After a little bit, they may catch on, hey, you know, I could build this. And suddenly they start to have a little bit of a plan, but nothing from the outset. You know? And here's the case with this view of history that we find in the book of Revelation, is that John is saying to the churches, don't despair. Don't think that what's happening now and the dangers that we are in are part of a random universe and God has suddenly just left his throne and he's no longer in charge. And don't think that this is going to end up in your destruction or total chaos or the end of the world or something that is not welcome. This is all part of God's plan before time began. You mean God planned for a Messiah before time began? Did he know we were going to sin and disobey him? Did he know there would be need of a Savior at some point in our history? Is Jesus' whole event really a historical event? John, and we know this from his gospel, takes it more into the spiritual realm as a spiritual event than an historical one. He does not deny the historicity of the cross resurrection and the Christ ministry and time on earth. He does not deny the historical Jesus, but that is a secondary to the cosmic Christ, the one revealed in Colossians 1:15 and following, the one who holds all things together, the one who's in charge of the entire universe. And that's the Christ that John lifts up for us now here in this 12th chapter. That is the Christ that he is presenting to the church again in the moment of the greatest peril and danger, the Christ who is in charge. He is in charge, and God is in charge because he's had this plan before time began. Did he know we were going to sin? He knew he was going to create free creatures. He knew that there was evil because there was evil in the heavenly places. The spiritual realm had to be cleansed first. He knew that we as free creatures, if we had the right to choose, might choose our own way rather than God's way. He knew that even though we were children around the same table, there would come a time when we might rebel. Just as every parent can look at their sweet little baby lying in the cradle and know there will come a day when they will be a teenager. Oh, I'll take these years over those. I wouldn't trade any of them. God knew, he knew that who we were from the very beginning, but he took the risk to make us persons with a freedom of will because that's what love does. And so from before time began, his love already planned for us. That's what John is saying. From before time began, he already planned for you, the church. From before time began, he already planned for Jesus and his Messiah. From before time began, he planned all of these things. We don't need to be afraid. It's all according to divine and holy plans. Now, things unfold by human actions, but not just by human actions. The things that happen in history are unexplainable so often. And we see them, it's like suddenly something just happens to all creation. And epic events occur. I really liked Abraham Lincoln. If you stop to think about it, how did he ever get elected president? He wasn't a national figure. He had participated where he had debated Frederick Douglass for his Senate seat in Illinois. And he got some national attention through those debates. But he lost that election. And he was a Republican, and it was a new party. He was originally a part of the Whigs, But when the Republican Party started to form just prior to 1860, he joined. He became part of the Republican Party. But it was a brand new party, an upstart in that political year, 1860. There were 4 candidates for president. How did Abraham Lincoln, as part of an upstart new party, barely known on the national stage, get elected president of the United States in 1860? He didn't have a majority of the votes, only a plurality. Just barely enough to get the Electoral College stamp of approval. And yet he was the president. Was there anybody else for that time or that place? What, do you think that was just a happenstance? That was just a random event that occurred? And if somebody else could easily have been elected ahead of him and things might have turned out differently? Or do you think somebody was in charge of that whole thing? I prefer to think that God is the God of history, who is omnipotent and is over it all and is in charge of it all, and he knows where everything is going. And we can all be a part of God's historical plan, God's plan for all of history as the church. That's part of the good news of this. Things don't just unfold. As I said, human rebellion is a story as ancient as time, and we all know when we look at the child in the cradle, there will come those difficult years. But it began when a human first picked up a club and beat his brother to death. And it will not end until God's kingdom comes, where there will be no more death and only peace. So God was not surprised by our rebellion. That's the point I'm trying to make now. He's not surprised. He wasn't caught off guard. He didn't have to come up with a whole new plan because somehow his original design wasn't working. It was off track. It got off track, but he got it back on track. But it was part of what he anticipated from the very beginning, because he is the omnipotent God and he can see things from an eternal perspective, and he knew what would happen. He knew the outcome of giving consciousness and reasoning human creations freedom of will. So what John, the first good news is, John is reminding his congregations of all things, of the cosmic nature of the event they're in, and that God is in charge. And they don't need to be frightened of the devil. His time is short. He reminds them that the devil has fallen to the earth, and he's a roaring lion now, and he seems so powerful and strong simply because his time is short. And he also reminds them that no matter what human beings devise and plan, and that can even be the best engineers, the best planners, the best reasoners, which was what they considered Rome to be, no matter what they devise to plan, the universe is not in Roman control. And if we surrender to Roman control, we are idolatrous, surrendering to a God that is no God, and we will die as surely as they do. Well, if we took this perspective of Revelation and applied it to what's happening in Iran, what would be our view of the situation there? On BBC the other night, I saw them. They interviewed an Iranian man, and he didn't want him to use his face, and I finally asked him to kind of mask his voice because of what he had to say. And Iran reported everybody was courageous and supporting the defense of their homeland, and wonderful things were happening, and they had enough to really attack back at America and Israel, and they were not afraid. And he went on international news and said he was tired, he was frightened, and all of Iran was the same. They were in their houses. They were afraid to come out. He was trying to figure out how to get out of Iran with his family. And he said they were all hoping that it will soon be over. Now, I've never lived under those conditions. I've never lived with missiles raining down on me, and I don't think any of us here have. What would that be like? I do not know. But I know that I'm anxious about what is happening there now. I grew anxious when Iran started firing missiles, and they went to all the countries around them, all the Arab nations within an arc of their influence. All those Arab nations that supposedly were not their enemies, but their friends, and they started blowing up targets in those nations. And I started to see this, and I wondered if those Arab nations would respond back, or if they would fire missiles into Israel. Or what was the outcome of all this going to be? Were we going to have Third World War? Were we going to have chaos and destruction? Was this going to expand to the point where it got out of all control and we would be affected because of terrorist actions within our own nation, on our own shores? All of those anxieties kind of manifested at one point or another in my mind, and I had to stop and take deep breaths and go, but God is in charge. Whatever is happening is according to God's eternal plans, and we know the end of the story. We know where this is going. We know what the outcome is going to be. Iran's not in charge. They're not going to take over the world. And, frankly, I have to say on the other side, America's not in charge. Israel's not in charge. None of us are really in charge of the cosmos. None of us are really in charge of God's world. I learned this especially during the Cold War because I was watching that clock that nuclear physicists devised. And where are we in terms of the survival of this planet? And back then it was based on the nuclear arms race. And we were a minute or two to midnight. And midnight is when all things would be destroyed by nuclear war. And I lived in the 60s with the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that, as did you. And you know what that time was like, what that Cold War was like, what that nuclear arms race was like, and how insecure we all felt. I mean, yes, I had the little drill, participated in it for a while where teacher, there would be an alarm in the school and we'd all have to get under our desks. And we learned how to get under our desk and tuck our heads down and kind of protect ourselves. And somebody at some point asked, in the case of a nuclear attack, what are these desks going to do? And at some point in my early education as a child, we stopped having those drills. And I don't know when that point came. But I can remember how anxious were those years. And we were so afraid the world was going to end in nuclear chaos and nuclear annihilation, nuclear apocalypse. And it didn't happen. The fall of the Berlin Wall reminded us who was in charge. That was a temporary human event. John reminds us in a cosmic picture who's in charge. And we need not be afraid. That's his message.